So we are very, very excited to welcome Abby Gilman back for part 2 of Ma Shemo. Who is that Schmo anyway? So, Sherry, did you want to say something? Or you're just going to let Abby get right to it?
I think we can just let Abby get right to it. Everybody who was here last time, and I think she needs no introduction to us.
Great. All right. Good.
Abby, you've got to unmute yourself.
Abby will unmute herself, I hope. But before she starts, I just want to express my gratitude for her coming back and talking to us more. And please excuse my dogs. And I also want to express my gratitude to Sherry for making this happen. This is
Here.
very great that we have a second chance. So thank you very much, Sherry.
Yeah. I just want to request, Jim, that if you be
Give me 1 second.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, so
go ahead.
that's okay. It might help me. I have a whole bunch of slides, and it might help maybe if I asked you or someone else to read occasionally. That might be.
I'm very happy to do so.
Unmuted.
Just give me my cue.
Okay, and also I'll pause a couple of times for with questions for discussion.
Great.
If the best thing, if you have a question, to signal or send Jim a note or something to stop me. If you have any question, I'm happy to be interrupted, but I will also stop a couple of times. I'm going to be using slides, so I won't be able to see your faces. It's always weird, a little weird, but so be that. Also some films.
Great.
So before I share my
one note, Abby, just for Marcia, just so in case you didn't know, Marcia, I don't know if you know this or not, but you can raise your hand by pushing *9 on your telephone. So if you want to ask a question, don't feel like you're left out because you're not on the video feed.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay. Before I start, I want to say that I'm going to be talking about what I refer to as the proper name of God. Tonight's talk is about naming God, and what do I mean by the proper name of God? Well, sometimes it's called the tetragram or tetragrammaton, YHWH, Yud-He Vav-He in Hebrew. Or it might be written out as Yahweh or Adonai, or in Christian Bibles, Jehovah. All of those are appellations for what is called the proper name of the Israelite God, of the Jewish God. And as you probably know, in the Hebrew Bible, there are two main names for God. There are many names, but two main names. And one is Elohim, right? And Elohim is usually translated simply as God. And that could also mean any God, generic God. And then there's another name, and the other name is what I'm calling the proper name of the national deity of the Israelites. And that is what is usually translated as Lord. So as you know, when you say Adonai Eloheinu, Lord our God, those are the two names. Lord is the proper name of just our God, or just the Israelite God, and God is a generic Elohim. And the proper name is ineffable, it's unpronounceable, it's very, very holy, and always has been. And so from very early on, there were substitutions used in order to avoid saying that name and profaning it. And the most common substitute is the word Adonai. The word Adonai came to be used because it appeared next to that other name so many times that it became used instead of it. So if you're reading Torah and you see that Yud-He Vav-He, you say Adonai. Another is the name Hashem, right, which means the name. I'm just by way of background that this is, and at the very end of my talk, I'm going to ask you, how you feel about these appellations for God, if it's something you think about, if you use other names, if when you say the word, if you think about the word Lord, which is the most common, a very common word in Jewish prayer books. In my Koran Siddur here, Lord is the English word. And there's a lot at stake. And so we'll come back to that. But that is what I'm going to be speaking about. And I'm going to be coming at it, as you all know, from the tradition of the German Jewish translations of the Hebrew Bible. And last time, the very last thing I said last time was I said, the most important thing you need to know about the German Jewish, well, there's two things to know about the tradition of German Jewish Bible translation. One is that there were immensely prolific. There were, maybe 16 original translations, new translations done in, between the 1770s, 80s, and the 1930s. That's a short time. So one is how many translations there were, and the other most famous tidbits, so to speak, is that the very first translator, Moses Mendelssohn, who lived in the 18th century, who was a major philosopher, cultural figure in Berlin, well known in the German Enlightenment, one of the very first Jews who rose to prominence in Germany at a time when most Jews still only spoke Yiddish. Mendelssohn, who is regarded as the very first translator of the Hebrew Bible into German for Jews, did something incredibly audacious. And he took that proper name that I was just referring to, and he translated it as Der Ewige, das ewige Wesen, der Ewige, which means the eternal or the eternal one. And this name, this invention of this name became, so to speak, the signature of the German Jewish Bible into the 19th and 20th centuries. And because the Mendelssohn translation traveled eastward, it became absorbed not only into translation, but into prayer books, into German prayer books, prayer books from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The name became, widely known as a translation as Der Ewige, very, very widely known. And I'm going to tell you today the story of Der Ewige. I'm going to tell you how Mendelssohn came to that decision. And that requires going back in time from 18th century Germany to ancient and medieval translations in different languages. And then I want to show you going forward some examples of how that name Der Ewige was received in subsequent generations. And how in almost all the subsequent translations it was retained, although there were two very, very significant objections to Der Ewige, and they were both by philosophers. So the first major objection was from Samson Raphael Hirsch in the 1860s. We talked about him last week. And the second was by Franz Rosenzweig in the 1920s. And they both were very, very opposed to using Der Ewige in their translations. And they came out with very powerful arguments against it, saying that he got it wrong. But they were in the minority. Mendelssohn, as I said, was kind of the Moses figure of modern German Jewry. And Der Ewige was the name that he bequeathed to his compatriots when they asked him, as the Israelites said to Moses, Ma Shemo, how shall we call God in our new language? Why did he choose their Eviga? What did it mean? Why was it rejected? This is the story I want to tell you tonight. And so the most, something else I alluded to last time is that, and this is an insight that Rosenzweig had in his criticism, in all his criticism of Mendelssohn for making the wrong choice, he gave him credit for something very important. And he said that Mendelssohn linked the rendering of the name to the revelation of the name. He, in other words, and he at least claimed to, or he drew his idea about how to translate the proper name from the scene of the burning bush, from the scene of Moses, the dialogue between God and Moses at the burning bush. And so we need to go back to that scene to look at that dialogue and try to understand what that is all about. But I thought that I would show you a little film version of that dialogue just to kind of get us in the mood and set the scene. So I'm going to show you a clip from The Prince of Egypt. I hope you've all seen it.
It's great.
Right? If you haven't seen it, okay, you must see it. So hopefully my, okay, so I'm going to show you just about 2 or 3 minutes from this, and I hope you can see, everyone can see this.
Here I am. Take the sandals from your feet. For the place on which you stand is holy ground. Who are you? I am that I am. I don't understand. I am the God of your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
You are born of my mother in heaven. You are our brother.
What do you want with me? I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt and have heard their cry.
Stop it! Leave that man alone!
So I have come down to deliver them out of slavery and bring them to a good land. A land flowing with milk and honey. And so unto Pharaoh I shall send you, me. I to lead these people? They'll never believe me. They won't even listen. I shall teach you what to say. But I was their enemy. I was the prince of Egypt, the son of the man who slaughtered their children. You've chosen the wrong messenger. How can I even speak to these people? Who made that power?
Okay. So you got to see the Prince of Egypt if you haven't. Okay. So actually, I'm just curious. Sorry, I'm just curious. How faithful do you think that rendition is to the Exodus 3 in the Torah? It's kind of a random question, but do you think they did a good job?
Yeah.
I think it got the basic idea of it.
Some things relate directly to the text and some are embellishments,
Okay, true.
intertexts.
Um,
It reminds me what they used to say in Chicago politics: we don't want nobody sent.
Actually, the thing is that Moses, of course, objects over and over again to being asked on this mission, but the reason that's given in the dialogue here, that they're going to see him as representing the oppressor, is not one that he mentions anywhere in there.
no,
Righto.
that's right. That's right.
Well, I was waiting for him to say what his name was. You know, what should we call him? And when you said the Abraham,
That's right.
I thought that I'm waiting for him to say, "I will be what I will be," and that must be where Mendelssohn took his translation from.
Well, he said it right up at the beginning, right? Right. So the very first thing Moses says is, "Who are you?" Right? He doesn't say, right? He says, "Who are you?" And then God says, "I am that I am." And he comes back with the perfect response. I don't understand, which is exactly what Jews have been saying, for thousands of years. It's funny. Okay, so we'll come back to that, but I think I'm glad to hear your responses to that.
I just want to point your attention to the chat where Ellen has made a text, and I'm going to read it just because I know that Marcia is not going to be able to read it, so I'm going to read it out loud. Ellen, unless you object, in which case unmute yourself and tell me right now. Otherwise, I'm going to read it so Marcia can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen says, totally wrong. No sense of Moses as a shepherd, which is a very important part of the context. When I see scenes in caves, I think of a totally different God context.
And you heard the sheep bang at the beginning. So it did kind of say he was allude to him at being a shepherd.
Yeah. And then Ellen adds, I do like the translation eternal for I am that I am. Weissman responds, I saw shepherd aspects, but maybe I interpreted the stick as a crook. All right. So please do feel free to do the chat, but just know that since we do have someone who's going to have a hard time reading them on the screen, that I will read them out loud.
Right. And you can interrupt me if someone, because I might not be seeing what's on the chat.
Yeah. Before we go on, I would just like to note that the translation as eternal is very familiar to me because that's what the Haggadah that my family used as.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Eternal our God, all through it.
Fantastic.
And at the Seder, we sometimes used English rather than just going through the Hebrew that most people didn't know.
Okay. Well, we're gonna, I'm very glad to hear it. I'm also glad to hear that Ellen likes it. I'm gonna see if I can get the right presenter view here. It's not really, let me see if I can, hold on a second. For some reason it's, let's see. Whoops. Okay, just give me 1 second to,
For a minute, Abby.
okay. Will this work? Are you able to see?
Yes, we can see. Ellen Messer says the Maxwell House used eternal.
I know. I want you to keep an open mind. This is exactly some things that are at stake.
Great. Abby, I'm just going to take, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to take the liberty of before you, could you go back to the other slide? Because we do have someone here who's not going to be able to see those. So I want to read every slide if that's okay.
Oh.
Is that all right?
Sure.
Great. Okay. So this slide says Ma Shemo.
Just my introduction. Title.
Say again?
Like, this is just my title.
Right. Insights into translating the name of God from a history of German Jewish Bible translation from Chicago University Press, 2018. And it has Abby's email address, which is available if you need it.
Okay. So this is our question. This is our question. Jim, you want to read the question?
Sure. Vayomer Moshe el ha-Elohim hine anochi va el bnei Yisrael v'amarti lahem Elohei avotechem shelachani aleichem v'amru li ma shemo ma omar aleichem. But Moses said to the deity, suppose I come to the children of Israel and say to them, your father's deity has sent me to you. And then they say to me, what is his name? What should I say to them? And this is William Propst's translation.
William Propst's translation. Okay. So we last time I mentioned what's so interesting about this, of course, and unlike in the film, that Moses isn't saying to God, you know, what is your name? But rather he is putting the question in the mouths of the Israelites. It's a hypothetical. If they were to ask me, then what should I tell them? He imputes the question to others. But of course, this is something that has been, this very question has been, analyzed. And I just wanted to share before we move on to the answers, to God's answers. I wanted to share this insights from the prop also from the Anchor Bible. And I'm not going to read it, but I just want to paraphrase that he speculates that really it's Moses who wants to know. And Moses wants to know God and see God many times, right, through the text. And that in a way, that it's possible that he doesn't know the name of this God who's coming to him. He might be testing the voice. He may be ignorant, having grown up in Egypt. It's important to know that this isn't the first time that Yud-He Vav-He appears in the Torah. It's used already in Genesis 2, verse 4, but it is the first time in an Elohist text. So in the Elohist document, it is the first time that this name is introduced. And I thought this was a very interesting insight. He says that the name is a shibboleth. And it's a shibboleth between the text and the reader. And that if you think of the text being, the story being recorded and edited, it needs to confirm that this text, Exodus, is speaking in Yahweh's name. It is speaking in God's name, in the national deity's name. And if it weren't, then it might not be taken so seriously. So there are many levels on which this question can there are many resonances in this, just this very question of Moses is asking the question. I thought it's interesting. So now this is also something that's very, very important. And if you take away anything from my talk tonight, this is extremely important. And God gives 3 answers to the question of Shemo. Okay, there are 3 separate answers. And reading in English, the first answer is, right, Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Right, God said to Moses, asher eheyeh, asher eheyeh. That's the first answer. Vayomer, and he continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Eheyeh sent me to you. Okay, so that's the second answer. First answer, Eheyeh, asher eheyeh. Second answer, just Eheyeh. And then there's another answer. God said further to Moses, thus shall you speak to the Israelites. And there we have the Yud He Vav He, the proper name being introduced in this translation, the Lord. Okay, the Lord, Adonai, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever. Zeh Shemi Le'olam. Right? This my appellation for all eternity. Zeh Zichri Ledor Dor. Okay. And the fact that this is 3 different answers was noticed by the rabbis, and I only really learned that by looking at a midrash. The rabbis came up with a wonderful, wonderful midrash. And what the rabbis noticed is that there's a discrepancy between the first and the second answer. The first answer, that the second is like an abbreviation of the first, right? From Eheyeh, asher eheyeh to Eheyeh. So I can't resist sharing this midrash, which Rashi quotes, and it's from the Talmud Brachot. The rabbis interpret Eheyeh asher, and this is also extremely important, which is that the rabbis.
Abby, we missed a bit of what you said. You said it's from the Talmud.
Brachot 9b, also quoted in Rashi. So what's extremely important is how the rabbis interpreted Eheyeh asher eheyeh. And the way they interpreted it is, I will be with them, I will be with them in this predicament, what I will be with them in their future predicaments. Wow. So, okay, so in other words, I will be with them now, I will be with them in the Crusades, I will be with them in the Shoah, I will be, okay, that's how, so they interpolate a little dialogue that Moses says, oh Lord of the universe, why should I mention to them all these other troubles? They have enough problems as it is. So he says, okay, well then in unjust case, just say Eheyeh. Okay, no need to. So that's how they understand the second answer. And I think it's just a brilliant midrash.
It is, and it justifies the translation as eternal. It gives it that dimension into future time.
Yes, it does. We will see that exactly coming up. We will see that coming up. Okay. Now let's go back to Mendelssohn. So Mendelssohn, how does he translate Eheyeh asher? The first answer, he says, Ich bin das Wesen, welches ewig ist. He says, Eheyeh asher eheyeh, I am the being which is eternal. Okay. And the second answer, just one word, Eheyeh, he translates as das ewige Wesen, welches sich nennt, ich bin ewig. Okay. So the eternal being, which named itself, I am eternal, has sent me to you. So Mendelssohn, we see, is really elaborating here, paraphrasing, but elaborating to convey that God is naming God's self eternal, the eternal one. And you see why this was so audacious, because, you know, Eheyeh asher eheyeh, ich bin das Wesen, welches ewig ist, might be an interpretation, but it doesn't sound anything like the original, right? Which has this weird symmetry. It's very ambiguous and dark, right? I am the being who is eternal is very clear and straightforward. And then, of course, his second, where he takes one word, Eheyeh, and translates it in like with 9 German words. You see him really, it's a really overdetermined. So the question is, how does Mendelssohn come to that decision? And by the way, these are just some ancient translations, which of Eheyeh asher eheyeh from the Septuagint. I don't know Greek or Latin, so I can't really say anything about them. I am the one who is, I will be who I will be, and I am who I am in the Vulgate. I'm just sharing that with you. But what's very important here, when I ask the question of how did Mendelssohn come to his this choice, there are many different ways to answer the question. And he so what he ends up doing, and we'll see that in a minute. My slides are a little bit out of the order that I thought they were in. He explains it in his commentary. He justifies it. The Mendelssohn's translation was called the Beur, and it's called the Beur meaning commentary, because he composed, he and some other assistants composed a very detailed commentary. And his commentary is where he explains what his decisions. He presents it as an innovation born of compromise. He gives various explanations. We'll see that in a minute. But I want to look at the roads that he did not take and the options that he might have taken. Okay. So first of all, he rejected the approach of his immediate precursors, who were these Yiddish Enlightenment translators. I talked about them last week. And I wanted to show you what those Yiddish translations look like. And what you see here is what this translator Blitz did. Do you see where my arrow's pointing?
You're moving it a lot, but yeah.
The blue arrow.
Okay. Not the mouse.
So what did he do? He uses parentheses and keeps the Hebrew Eheyeh asher eheyeh. He keeps the original Hebrew. He doesn't translate it. He retains it as it is. Okay, it says here, this is verse 14, Da sprach Gott zu Moshe, right? Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Und sprach, also sollst du zu den Kindern Yisrael sagen, Eheyeh. He keeps the Hebrew. In other words, he retains it. Okay. And Witzenhuizen, the other Amsterdam translator, also a Enlightenment translator, does the same thing, but he uses these bold, large font letters, Eheyeh, Sher Eheyeh, okay? He does not try to translate Eheyeh, Sher Eheyeh. He retains it in the Hebrew, okay? So these translators, even though they borrowed, do you remember, they borrowed heavily from the Dutch Bible and from the Luther Bible, from Christian Bibles for their German, for their Yiddish translations. They must have believed that in Jewish Bible translations for Jews, that Eheyeh Sher Eheyeh had to be retained in Hebrew. Okay.
Excuse me, is this German in
Yiddish.
or this is Yiddish?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's a Germanic Yiddish.
This is Yiddish from Amsterdam.
Hmm.
Okay. So if you look at here, I mentioned the Dutch States Bible. And you see that the Dutch States Bible translated Eheyeh Sher Eheyeh, right? Ik zal zijn die I don't know Dutch, right? But they did translate it following following the Christian tradition. And you see it there. And also in the Luther Bible, you see that, of course, Luther translated it. Eheyeh Sher Eheyeh, ich werde sein, der ich sein werde. And he introduced this word, der Herr, for Lord. Okay, so for Adonai, he introduced der Herr. So these were the precursors of the Amsterdam Bibles, the Christian precursors, and Christian Bibles translated Eheyeh Sher Eheyeh. But those Jewish Yiddish translators decided not to. So Mendelssohn did not follow that path. He wanted to translate those words. Okay, now I'm going to come to, oh, and by the way, I don't have a slide for this, but Mendelssohn's also was reading Christian translations from the 18th century from his colleagues. And in the 18th century, in German Bibles, the name Jehovah was introduced. So he could have used, he wasn't going to use Jehovah and he wasn't going to use Herr. Okay, so but he also needed something, he was a philosopher. He was a philosopher. And this was the ultimate challenge for a philosopher. So let's look at what he says. And this is, first of all, and what you see in his commentary and explanation, he gives different, explanations. So he says, first, he refers to the Midrash. He says in the Midrash, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moshe, tell them I am the one who was and who is and who will be in the future. And the rabbis said, I will be with them in their trouble. That's the Midrash that we already looked at. So he gives a traditional explanation. And then he begins to be more of a philosopher. And he says, because in the Creator, past and future are contained in the present, all the times need to be contained in one name. In German, there is no word that includes all the times, eternity, the necessity of being, and providence, like this holy name, das ewige, notwendige, vorhersehende Wesen. So ultimately, he gives a philosophical explanation saying that eternity includes incorporates necessity and providence, and that was the best he could do given the constraints of the German language. So he combines philosophical reasons, linguistic reasons, and also saying that he consulted the rabbis. But then he goes on in also the very interesting way. He says, and the present German translator decided to render the name with respect to eternity, because for him, the other meanings branch out from this central one. Similarly, I have, oops, what happened? Someone else's.
The slide disappeared.
Lee, it says I'm sharing Lee Auspitz's screen. Something, someone else shared a screen. Okay, sorry, it's okay. So similarly, I have found in Jonathan ben Uziel a rendering similarly oriented to this meaning. I who am and shall be has sent me to you. So what's very interesting is that in this, at the very end of his commentary, he mentions almost in passing Jonathan ben Uziel. And who is Jonathan? Jonathan ben Uziel was a also Aramaic Targum, and known as pseudo Jonathan, but he was known in Mendelssohn's time as Jonathan ben Uziel. But he finds, what's interesting to me is that Mendelssohn, he's making a very controversial decision, but his controversial decision to give a paraphrase, right, to paraphrase the name, but he refers to he finds a precursor, an ancient Aramaic precursor, who is called, he calls Jonathan ben Uziel. And as you know, the Targums, the Aramaic Targums are the oldest Jewish translations of the Torah. This is the Targum, the Aramaic on the left of what pseudo Jonathan. And here's a Hebrew translation. And what you see is that he doesn't, he also gives a kind of paraphrase of the verse, of the same verse. And he says, but he starts, he does even much more elaborate. He says, he who spoke and the world was, who spoke and all things were. So in that part of the translation, he refers back to creation. So he's making a connection all the way back to let there be light. He connects in Eheyeh, Asher Eheyeh, to Yehi Or. He's saying the one who spoke and the world was created. So he's linking this scene of the burning bush, Exodus 3 back to Genesis, and linking the God of revelation to the God of creation. So he solerated again. He says, he who spoke and the world was, who spoke and all things were. And he said, this shall you say to the sons of Israel, I am he who is and who will be, has sent me to you. Okay. And so what's interesting for me in trying to understand Mendelssohn is that this is that we can also see we can also find the origins of the road that Mendelssohn did not take. And that is the translation of the Targum Onkelos. And when we think of Targum, of Aramaic Targum, or you look in the Mikrot Gedolot and you see the Aramaic, on the left side, we see that is the Targum Onkelos. And what did Onkelos do? He doesn't even try to translate a Heya Shera Heya. He leaves it in the Hebrew. So what we see is, going back all the way to the Aramaic, we see like a fork in the road. That there were the beginning of two Jewish approaches to translating this very esoteric phrase. And Onkelos initiated one approach, which was to leave the words in Hebrew. And that was followed by the Yiddish translators, right? He left them, when you leave them untranslated, in a sense, you're treating them like a proper name, right? If it says, his name, John, my name is John, you're not going to translate John, okay? So he treats it like a proper name. He doesn't translate it. And another Targum, another Aramaic Targum that did try to translate it in a philosophical vein, and that was the road that Mendelssohn, that appealed to Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn's priority was to, and come back to this, and I'll take a pause for a second, wrapping up Mendelssohn, that Mendelssohn's priority was to, first of all, he was a philosopher, and he wanted to take up the challenge of translating, of trying to translate the name of God. As a translator, as a literary translator, his priority was to disambiguate the scripture. He didn't want anything that was not utterly clear. He didn't want to leave anything ambiguous. He believed that every word could and should be translated as clearly as possible in German. It was essential that everything be utterly clear. And he came up with this: I am the being that is eternal. It's very clear. It's very unambiguous. And then, to come back to the brilliant, the hop that he had, was that he used Exodus 3:14, and his translations of 3:14 to authenticate his own choice of the name, by having God's self, give that name. I will be known as the Eternal One. I am the being who is eternal, and that's how you shall call me. Okay, so I want to stop and hear any questions or comments. Someone
has his hand up, both literally and electronically.
Did you call on me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think I have an idea where this may be heading and why there were objections by Rosenzweig to this interpretation, which Maxwell House and others brought to us. As a philosopher of the Enlightenment, Mendelssohn wanted not only to make a clear translation, but he wanted to be able to talk about the nature of God.
That's
and
right,
so
right.
he says God is eternal, and he says that God is providence, God knows all. And these are statements about the nature of God. But what happened is that Buber and Rosenzweig came along more than 100 years later, and they said, we're not interested in the nature of God. We're interested in encounter with God. And we want a name of God that represents that encounter. And I remember a long time ago reading a chapter by Buber about this passage, in which he talks about the ancient people in the desert who would have a personal experience of God, and they gave him a name that was being, you are. It's like you are. And so basically what they're saying is philosophy is gone down the wrong path. It talks about the nature of God, but it doesn't give enough understanding or appreciation that the purpose of religion is to encounter God. And if you remember with Buber, he's talking about how by encountering God, we get to encounter something special that then can flow out to our encounter with other people and in the world. And so that's why I think we have this objection to Mendelssohn's version of Ewige.
Miriam.
Assuming that was indeed the nature of their objection, and it sounds right to me what you're saying, Jim, I think their interpretation is un-Jewish. We have this whole tradition that this name is sacred and cannot be said except by the high priest in the Holy of Holies. And it seems, from a Jewish perspective, disrespectful to try to have an actual name of God. And I've got a problem with our current prayer book that uses Adonai, the Hebrew word, in the English translation, because that feels to me as if it's giving a name that's a proper name, and that's exactly what we're not supposed to do.
Good for you. I think Alex and then Sherry.
I just wanted to just to kind of repeat something that I think you said, make sure I understood it, but also to give it some emphasis, which is, in a sense, it's not a completely implausible reading of how God articulates his own name or identity here, to say that it has something to do with eternal being, right?
Right.
I'll be what I'm going to be. I'll always be that thing. Whether that's in the Midrash, it sort of appears also to be in the words here. Kind of there's this question about whether Midrash is inventive or not. But what really struck me was what you said at the end, which is that, in a sense, Mendelssohn was justifying, this is not the Yud He Vav He here. That's not the name that God speaks here as his own name. He says something else. So I understood you to be saying Mendelssohn essentially was using the same word in German for both ways of naming God. And that, in a sense, by saying that what he was saying here was the eternal one, that the fact that it's spoken by God here has some kind of that it reinforces the choice as legitimate where it appears elsewhere, even though it's actually a translation of different words in the Hebrew. Is that fair?
He uses all the three answers at the burning bush to say the same thing. He basically uses the eternal one as being the Ahaya Shir Ahaya is the first answer, Ahaya is the second, and the third is the name, right? God says, Adonai, Yud He Vav He is my name.
Okay, it's in all three cases. Got it.
He uses der Ewige for the same.
Okay.
This is exactly. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. I misunderstood a little.
Yeah. So we'll talk about Buber and Rosenzweig in a minute. I wanted to tell you kind of where all this goes in the next 150 years, and also look a little bit at English Bibles. But first, I'm going to show you one more film clip, just to show you an alternative screening, and you can now that you really understand the three different answers, you're in a good position to assess this. If I can bring it up. No, let's see, hold on a second. This is Cecil B. DeMille. Do you guys know this version? Have you seen the Ten Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille?
Years ago.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So just a short clip from this.
I am here. I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Lord, Lord, why do you not hear the cries of their children in the bondage of Egypt? I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Therefore I will send thee, Moses, unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring my people out of Egypt. Who am I, Lord, that you should send me? How can I lead this people out of bondage? What words can I speak that they will heed? I will teach thee what thou wilt say. When thou hast brought forth the people, they shall serve me upon this mountain. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. Now therefore go, and I will be with thee. But if I say to your children that the God of their fathers has sent me, they will ask, what is his name? And how shall I answer them? I am that I am. Thou shalt say, I am hath sent me unto you.
Okay, so how do you think that Cecil B. DeMille did? Pretty faithful. Pretty much more faithful to let's see if we can look at that. If my slides are, I come back to my this was the pretty much the dialogue of the Prince of Egypt, which goes right to the heart of the matter. Notice that the dialogue has already been going on for about 12 verses before Moses says, Ma Shemo. But in the Prince of Egypt, he comes right out with, who are you? I am that I am, and I don't understand. And then the third answer, but they skip over the second answer, which really doesn't make any sense anyway. Doesn't make much sense. But in this film, The Ten Commandments, the conversation is fairly faithful to this really long dialogue. It goes on for a chapter and a half, remember, at the burning bush. And it ends with the scene. Notice how the scene ends with the exact words from the verse. And then answers 1 and 2 are faithfully recorded, after which Moses really has nothing more to say. And the Torah, of course, it goes on and on after that. But it's kind of interesting to compare that. So what I'd like to do now is kind of maybe for about 10 more minutes, just kind of tell you where it all goes from here. You already pointed to the Buber Rosenzweig, but it's very important to realize that there were that Buber and Rosenzweig, well, that they were part of a history, and this is also very important in terms of understanding our English translations that we use today, which we talked about last time. So I referred last time to the second wave of translation. And the second wave were the translations that followed Mendelssohn. And they had a very high tolerance for ambiguity and for polysemy, which means that they were comfortable giving different options to the reader. And what you see here in this Zun's translation from 1838 is that if you go to the bottom line of the screen, that Zun's retained Mendelssohn's term der Ewige for Adonai throughout his Bible. It wasn't, in 1838, it wasn't an option to give that up. That was already, it stuck, as I said. But here he gives a different translation for the first answer. And here he just uses the Hebrew, eheyeh. So he, ich werde sein, der ich bin. He translates eheyeh asher eheyeh into German, I will be who I am. Then he uses eheyeh, but then he keeps der Ewige. And another example is this translation of Jolson. And if you don't know German, it looks a little confusing, but I think you can see what, if you just look at the first answer, you see what Jolson did. He said, he put in eheyeh asher eheyeh, and he translated it into German, and he used a star and parentheses and brackets, and to try to give different options to the reader. This is what a German Jewish translation looked like in the early 19th century, where you have footnotes and stars and parentheses and different options. And this is very much what we have in our Bibles today. So if you look at the JPS, the Eitz Chaim, you have eheyeh asher eheyeh with a star and a footnote and meaning uncertain and variously translated, etc. Eheyeh sent me to you is retained here. The Hebrew is retained here, but with a double star and footnotes and all of that. In Everett Fox, he also keeps both options. He gives the Hebrew eheyeh asher eheyeh, and then I will be there howsoever I will be there. And then for the name, he uses YHWH in capital letters. For this, he doesn't use Lord or. And then since a couple of you asked about Robert Alter, Robert Alter does the same thing. He gives eheyeh asher eheyeh in the transliteration. I will be who I will be. He gives both the Hebrew and a translation. And he uses Lord for God's name. I don't know why he does that, but so what I'm saying is that this is kind of, where we are, where our translations, contemporary Jewish Bibles give the options. They give different options, and they open up the text, and they open up but it is important. They feel that it is important to retain the Hebrew, but also to give a translation. And what is important to know is that this approach was originated in early 19th century German Jewish Bibles. This scholarly, kind of scholarly approach to Jewish Bible translation really, I mean, it's what that we have today, began in the early, in the 1830s and 40s in Germany. Do you have any questions or?
I think it's fascinating that it goes all the way back to those two Targums, that this issue has been puzzling us all these years.
Yeah, that's right. Sam?
It seems to me a central idea in here is the authority or the right to untangle the Yud Vav He that was for centuries kept a secret, was a direct reflection of direct encounter between the Jewish people and the unmentionable. And the biggest reservation I have problem with any of these approaches when also uses Lord, it's really so simple that he imposes nothing on the mysterious name. But I think that Mendelssohn took too much liberty he took a because the question, if Mendelssohn has a right to do it, then how many other people have rights to do it themselves? And then it opens up every interpreter's right to rename it according to their own midrashic whatever trail.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why Mendelssohn had to work so hard to justify what he did. And
I reject.
So brilliant and audacious that it stuck.
Well, it stuck with some. It didn't stick with me.
Well, German Jewish Bibles, it stuck. But you're right. Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. So I want to say a word about the Mendelssohn's detractors, since this has already come up and you already mentioned Buber and Rosenzweig. But you have to mention Hirsch. And, when people think of German Jewish Bibles, they might automatically think of Buber and Rosenzweig. Well, you got to know that they were in a tradition, that they were part of a history, and they pretended they were everything. Well, this is a harsh judgment on them, but they denied the history that they were rooted into in many different ways, rhetorically. But a lot of what they were doing was trying to challenge or uproot the tendencies that began with the Haskalah, because they felt that it had led German Jewry into in the wrong direction, as you were saying. And they invented, they had other priorities. They were creating a Jewish religious renaissance. But you got to mention Hirsch, our old Samson Raphael Hirsch, and to look at what he did in his German. And you see here that he kept Eheyah Shera Eheyeh in Hebrew letters. He doesn't translate it, and he doesn't even transliterate it, which is what our American Bibles do. But he keeps the Hebrew letters. And he was, but what does he do in his Bible? Is he takes a very unorthodox approach to God's name, as you see here for Elohim. He uses Got. And he used Got for both Adonai and Elohim throughout the Bible. He doesn't distinguish. And this was also very audacious. He used Got with spaces between the letters for the proper name and got like this for Elohim. And, you know, when he also was very, very opposed to, you know, he was the founder of neo-Orthodoxy, of modern Orthodoxy. And he was also very opposed to everything Mendelssohn represented. And Mendelssohn's, the Haskala's vision of German Judaism and where it had led, which was, in his view, to liberal Judaism. But he, in his commentary, he makes some interesting points that, and it's funny because he understands a Hayah Shera Hayah as reflecting the absolute freedom of God. He says this designation expresses with absolute certainty that basic truth, that the future goal of mankind is absolutely assured, and it is a call for man to use his power to carve the immediate future in God's service, to make God's will his will. And, you know, he gives, you know, a very different interpretation it's to the to understanding a Hayah Shera Hayah. Again, he's, you know, very certain that he sees this verse as having a very definite, clear meaning, that the future is assured and God is absolutely free and humans are free to make God's will our will. I think that Rosenzweig wrote this very famous whole essay about Mendelssohn's choice of the name called Der Ewige Mendelssohn and the Name of God. And challenging Mendelssohn was also a big priority of Rosenzweig and Buber. And this is just one quote from that essay. He doesn't say that Mendelssohn, he doesn't say it as nicely as James said it a few minutes ago. He says Mendelssohn made the wrong choice and he was influenced by Calvin. Because Calvin in the Geneva Bible used l'Éternel in his Geneva Bible. He accuses Mendelssohn of being a rationalist. He accuses Mendelssohn of going against the instinct of Jewish tradition.
And he sees Maimonides as not being in that tradition?
In Mendelssohn's case, the spirit made alliance, yes, because the Haskalah was because of its priority of reason, going against the sure instinct of Jewish tradition. This is a very harsh accusation.
Abby?
Yeah.
Alex wants to say something.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Well, I can wait. Go ahead. You're in the middle of something.
I just had that. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, now I lost track. Oh, I was just, for one, I was going to ask, did you have a slide earlier of Mendelssohn's translation?
Yes, I did.
Can you put that up again? I just wanted to see it again. And while you're looking, maybe I can just ask about something else.
Yeah.
So I remember once in the old Hillel building at Worship and Study, it was Shabbat morning, and Rabbi Gold left the minyan and he came back in with a book, and he happened to be sitting next to me that day, and he shows me this book and he says, "This is Mendelssohn's Bible in Yiddish."
Mendelssohn's
Okay.
Bible in Yiddish.
Yeah, hold on. Wait, I want to see this. Okay. So highlight that.
Well, sorry.
That's okay.
This is Mendelssohn's, here, well, here are the two, this here. But he's referring to, yeah.
Just 1 second. Okay, can you scroll the next slide just for a second?
He says, I am the being which is eternal, the eternal being which names itself, I am eternal, the ewige.
Okay. So I just glanced at the book that Rabbi Gold had. And I'm wondering now if you know the edition that he would, or translation that he would be talking about. If there was one, if there were multiples, and what it included. And my recollection was that it had a big block of text. So probably Hebrew with then the main translation next to it. Which is interesting to think if is that the Yiddish translation of Mendelssohn's German, but then it also had lots of smaller text. And I'm wondering, would that have been this explanation?
The Beor
that you were talking about, or
the Mendelssohn Bible was reprinted maybe 200 times, and always with a different layout and different editions. Sometimes they took out his commentary and they put Rashi back in. They retraditionalized it. Most of the translations were reprinted with only German and no Hebrew at all. They were reprinted with the Aramaic. I mean, there's a few hundred reprinted, and they always were different. So I can't, it's certainly
lots of options for what it could have been.
Possible. It's absolutely possible.
So I'm just gonna name that it's about 8 of 9, and I think we probably will want to wrap up by 9. So
yes, absolutely. So this is what I wanted to show you, though, that in the Geneva Bible, if you know French, I actually gave this talk in Paris, so I had to go and do my homework and look up and see what the Geneva Bible had and what French Jewish Bibles had. And you see that here that l'Éternel is the word that Calvin used, and that's used in the Geneva Bible for God. And that according to, one thing Rosenzweig points out that, Mendelssohn lived in Berlin, and the Huguenots Calvin's followers came to Berlin in the 17th and 18th centuries, and this Bible would have been known to Mendelssohn. So he accuses him of, we remember that all of Mendelssohn's reasons, he accuses him of taking this from Calvin, okay, which is a very strong accusation. And this is actually in a French Jewish translation, which also has l'Éternel as the name for Adonai in these French Bibles. This is an early 19th century by Sado Khan's translation. So just so you see that. Yeah, so I'll just show you what Buber. I'll just end by showing you what Buber and Rosenzweig said. What Buber and Rosenzweig did with their translation. And they also took an extremely innovative approach to the 3 answers that we referred to. And they are very close to Luther, but they changed the word Sein to Dasein. And Dasein is this philosophical concept of being there. as Everett Fox translated, I will be there, not just I will be, but I will be there. And for the second answer, instead of eheyeh, they just say ich bin da, I am here. And then they came up with a equally very radical translation for the Tetragrammaton for the name of God, and they write simply They use pronouns. They use masculine. They don't use their hair. They don't use their eviga. They used capitalized masculine pronouns for God. Or ich or du. So the name would always be in a different form based on kind of an ever-changing leitmotif in the text. It was in the always in the vocative form. So if God is spoken in the third person, it would be or du or ich, depending on the context. So the name was always changing depending on the relationship of who was of the speakers in any given moment. They made sure that the name of God could never become an icon. So they said that the name wasn't supposed to be about an attribute, about this or that attribute, providence or eternity or Lord being the Lord or any of those things. So again, they came up with an extremely creative, which has actually also been, challenged on feminist grounds, because in some ways it exacerbates and highlights the masculinity of God. I had to mention that.
So Abby, I'm just going to point out that we have two more hands. Sam.
I'll stop there.
So if you don't mind stopping there, we can get these comments.
Yeah, I just had to show you that, Boober is so short.
Oh, glad you told us that. That's great.
Okay.
Ellen, go ahead. You had your hand up first. Ellen, are you still with us?
She typed it.
I'm not unmuted. Now I'm unmuted. I'll just read it.
Okay.
Have you looked at the way the different Bible translations were used in German liturgy? Because there were so many of those. They were continually kind of negotiating their relationship with the text, with Israelite history, with their fellow Christians and their fellow Jews. So, and really thinking much more, not just of the philosophy, but also of the theology and the social significance in terms of these relationships. So I'm just curious whether you've looked at those, because it would seem to be significant not only for the biblical translations, but how people actually use them in terms of using biblical citations in prayer.
I mean, that involves, doing a whole research into a whole other body of sources that I have not had a chance to. But I have met, I have spoken about this in Germany, and I've met some, I've met some students and some ministers, and they are very, very engaged with the Jewish translations today. I mean, that's just today.
Yeah, no, because I mean, it's very interesting also. One of the really big issues in each of the American Reform liturgical translations was how they were going to talk about God in the Shema.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just an interesting topic.
I'm happy to talk about that with you. It's a great topic.
And Sam, please, you get the last question.
Sam is muted.
But you have to unmute yourself. And I can't do it.
Sam, come on! I gotta wrap this up.
Okay, I'm here, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did Rosenzweig reject Maimonides when he threw out Mendelssohn is one question. And the second one is, whatever you have to say about the tradition of spelling God's name, G-O-D, versus spelling it with G-D, whether it has anything to do with this discussion.
I think it's a theological discussion. I mean, I had students in my course at BU this semester who wrote G-D in their papers, and You know, I don't. I think I can't really answer the first question. I will just say that I just want to say two things in closing. You know, Rosenzweig said, you know, you can't say, referring to Psalm 23, the eternal one is my shepherd, you know, but, you know, der ewige ist mein Hirt, the eternal one is my shepherd. Well, I don't know. You know, is the eternal a cold name? Is that, that's both what Hirsch and Rosenzweig attacked them. I'm not sure. I think the bigger question is for each of you to come to your own decision, and to see the options that there. The one option is that you follow historical precedent. You say, what does the Jewish translation tradition tell us? One option is to take an existential approach and say, this is about, you know, a metaphor. This is I want to invent something new and it's my prerogative. And, you know, another option is to not translate at all, leave it untranslated. And I think that when you have you know, God's untranslatable name, all of these options are viable, but you need to think about what you're doing when you make a choice.
I just wanted to respond quickly to what Sam said about Maimonides. I think that Maimonides, when we're attacking Maimonides, when he's criticizing Maimonides, what he's criticizing is the entire tradition of thinking of God in more abstract terms, as having these qualities, but not as a presence that you can actually encounter face to face, that you can speak to, that you can feel is right there to communicate with you in moments of trial and encounter. And what they're saying is that's terrible. That just bleeds the flesh and blood out of the Jewish experience. Remember, Buber was influenced by the Hasidim. And so what they're saying is that whole Aristotelian tradition of thinking about God as a bunch of qualities is not healthy for the revival of the Jewish people, and that there is something in our tradition about personally encountering God that needs to be incorporated into our understanding of this passage.
Jim, you've had the last word. Thank you, everyone, very much. Abby.
Thank you, Abby.
Yes, wonderful.
And next time,
very rich. So glad to spend time with you.
Really appreciate it. And
yeah, it was great.
Think about now. And we'll look forward to part 3. But
yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great.
Yes,
I will leave, but I will leave the meeting open in case you feel like schmoozing with one another.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to go, but I think Lee Oswitz had a question that didn't get asked.
Lee.
Oh, yes. Well, I just point out that all the discussion about the Ehyeh is really about the Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. And the Yud-Heh Vav-Heh has within it the present tense of the word to be. So it conveys to the Hebrew reader an ever presence. It is, I should just add, it's not correct to say that Maimonides saw God as a bundle of qualities or properties or attributes. In fact, his is a doctrine of negative attributes. That is to say, God is completely unknowable. But I prefer the straightforward, I shall be what I shall be, because earlier in the same text, just a few verses up, he says, Ehyeh imach. And when I gave a talk on this, it was pointed out by Ben Siegel that Buber uses that to establish this sense of encounter or relationship that Jim Leffert is talking about.
Very good.
I was wondering whether, I know this wasn't your topic, but in the ancient Near East, did they pronounce were they saying Adonai at the very earliest time, or don't we know that? When did Adonai actually come in for Yud Hey Vav Hey?
According to Rashi, it came in at the very beginning, but as Abigail pointed out,
Yeah.
the Yud Hey Vav Hey comes in Genesis as well. Abraham names the place of the Akedah with the Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, it's being pronounced as Adonai.
What I read in what I read simply in the JewishEncyclopedia.com, is from there are like a few hundred places in the Tanakh where those two words were Adonai, Aleph Dalid Nun Yud comes before Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Yeah, it's sort of like an apposition, though, not the.
No, so it became a way. It became the.
Yeah.
It became a substitute for it because it appeared so often next to it.
But we don't know how that word. I mean, it wouldn't have been Adonai, Adonai. We still don't know how it became.
But we say today Adonai Elohim, even though that's not what phonetically is on the page.
Right.
Well,
Thank
you so much. We have to have a Mother's Day call, and we appreciate your coming out on Mother's Day. And it was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Sherry, for organizing this.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll see you guys again soon. I'm coming to Harriet's talk on Thursday.
Oh, fabulous. That's
Great.
Okay. Erev Tov.
Erev Tov.
Great to see you.
Shavua Tov. Bye.
Shavua Tov.
Thanks. Great.
Toda.
Nice to see you. Hi, Norman.
So nice.
Hi, Abby.
Norman.
Oh, hi, Norman.
I've been here.
Everybody's hiding.
Hi, Alex.
Oh, I've been here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Abby.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Norman.
Hi, Lee. Absolutely. I'm glad. Lee, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Well, because I'm glad that you corrected what was said about Maimonides. Maimonides has no qualities whatsoever. You can't even say the or an about God. And Maimonides is in some ways the most mystical of all, because it's completely unknowable. But still there's some kind of so Buber and Rosenzweig are saying yes, unknowable, but except in actual existential situation. So, and the Dasein is a really wonderful way of getting around the because it's literal. I mean, I will be I'll be there. I'll be when I'll be there or whatever. Because Dasein is that's a nice word to being there. It's just more than being. It's being there. And who was it who said I will be with you, Mach. That's makes sense. Makes sense. There's the actual presence that's implied there. Maimonides doesn't go against that. In fact, but he does say you cannot attribute qualities to.
But the eternal doesn't the eternal have a sort of an Aristotelian implication?
Maimonides is often called Aristotelian, and certainly he's a philosopher in that sense. But that he doesn't say that. Maimonides doesn't say that, and I don't see. I'm not sure what Aristotle. He said all Aristotle says about something that we might call God is the first mover, the prime mover, prima mobile in Latin. So no, Aristotle is not interested in God's presence at all. There's no Dasein for Aristotle. God,
right.
God gets the whole thing going. That's all. So I mean, it's not. Aristotle is very un-Jewish in this sense, in any of the senses that Abby is talking about. It seems to me.
Sounds like Spinoza.
Spinoza is more like that. Is more Aristotelian.
I beg to differ, but
I don't know much about. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of difference between Spinoza and Aristotle, but neither of them is Spinoza interested in God's presence? Tell me, Lee. I don't know.
No, Spinoza is really interested in the God of science, In fact, it's Deus sive, sorry, it's natura sive Deus, nature or God. And he takes the notion of God's attributes of the midot and condenses them into two modalities, intellect and extension. And then science becomes the way of rationalize of finding the reason in. So it's a very radical.
Lee, when you say that Spinoza is interested in the science of God or God of science, that's rather Aristotelian, it seems to me. I mean, Aristotle is just interested in how the whole creation got going. I mean, so anyway, this is, I'm out of my depth.
I'm sorry. No, Spinoza rejects the notion of creation from nothing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's a long, that's another discussion.
It's a big deal, yeah. But what was really interesting, Abby, and what you're talking, I mean, is making these distinctions, you know, the two schools of translation in a way. And actually, it seems to me that the one school, which is the Mendelssohn thing, is just to try to obscure the whole thing. And we, it's like whereas Buber was trying to get to something, an actual experience.
I don't think so. I think Buber is doing the exact same thing Mendelssohn is doing, trying to come up with something radically new.
No, but you're talking about the innovation, but in terms of, but with the content of it is very different, because the ewige is something quite abstract, and Buber and Rosenzweig are doing anything but abstract. They,
But to use pronouns that are always changing throughout the text is.
Well, the way I've always understood ehiyeh, asher ehiyeh is, it's a function, it's a variable function. I'll be what I'll be when I'll be when I'll be, whatever. You can't tell me what I'm going to be. I'll be what I'll be. It's like if you take the colloquial, if you say, I don't know, I'll be what I be, like that.
I'm what is.
I'm what, yeah, whatever, whatever. It's like whatever.
Like whatever.
Don't try to pin me down. That's what I think. So, so in that sense, I think, Buber and Rosenzweig are onto something. It's variable.
But using the masculine pronouns, what do you think?
No, come on. I mean, I don't, God's not a male. The masculine, but you don't have any objection to the ish, do you? Or the do. It's just the air is a problem. What can you say?
Well,
yeah. If you could say er und sie, or whatever. But it's the pronoun isn't the problem, it's the masculinity that's the problem. But they weren't even seeing that. I mean, I don't think they were seeing that.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So
one might say, I just wanted to add that this is one of perhaps only two places where philosophers can hang their hats in the entire Hebrew Bible.
Exactly. That's very true.
The other one being the personification of wisdom in Proverbs, which.
Well, if you're talking about metaphysics, maybe, but if you're talking about ethics, philosophers are also interested in ethics. And without Isaiah and Jeremiah and so forth and so on, I don't, what are we talking about?
No, I mean.
Lee, I just want to say that, this is a really, in this field, the debate between, Rosenzweig's philosophical attack on Mendelssohn is that's a philosophical debate. And you have to look at his essay, which is really fascinating. But you're right that he what I don't like is that he accuses him of basically taking it from Calvin, and saying this is not even a Jewish approach.
Well, it comes right out of Maimonides.
Well, he says he writes a whole essay.
Parenthetically, yes.
the interesting thing you have to remember is that Rosenzweig, grew up on, on Der Ewige. I mean, that was what he grew up with.
Uh-huh.
And you also, my friend wrote a book on connecting Rosenzweig's theory of translation with, the Star of Redemption. I mean, this is a topic for philosophers, and it's not a topic for me. But going, and in the star, eternity and the eternal is a very big, important concept.
Interesting.
And he gives it a philosophical, he even says it in the star, eternal is not something abstract. Eternal means, tomorrow. I mean, eternal, there's a very, so Rosenzweig had eternity in mind. He's a philosopher. And this is a very deep concept that he, comes, and then, so this is at the very end of his life. And they want to make as strong a statement as possible against Mendelssohn and against against the things that he wrote about Mendelssohn and about the Haskalah and all of the whole trajectory of German Judaism, where, they were violently, opposed to where it had come. And they took a very strong, so part of it is philosophical and part of it, I think, is really like rhetorical, that they, they had to say, this was wrong. This was absolutely wrong. And to see it in context is interesting.
Excuse me, if Mendelssohn had said, which he didn't, he was very firm in saying this, if he had said, always with you, or eternally with you, that would combine these things. That it would combine, always imach. Whatever. Anyway, very interesting.
He thought eternity included, ewig included notwendig and vorhersehend. He said, necessary and providential. Providence is imach, that's providence. And notwendig, he said those were all included in eternal. But you see in his little explanations, which are also have been, his biur was in Hebrew, but it's been translated by Micah Gottlieb, and but you see how he spins it all ways, trying to,
Mendelssohn does.
Mendelssohn, trying to give so many different, I love just the way he tries to justify it in all these different ways. It's just beautiful rhetorically,
But it comes through in translations or in the Maxwell House Haggadah as very abstract. You don't know what that's about. The eternal.
I think
that's interesting.
Though. It's something that Jews have always, have been seeking for centuries. I think it has some power.
What, the eternal? The
eternal one. Maybe even more than Lord. I mean, what is Lord? Lord is the King James. I mean, Lord is
No, well, Lord. I mean, what you said before makes, because it's Adon Yudebate. So Adon is just it's a kind of a way of addressing a superior. That's all.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So I think the point, I wish Miriam was still here, because I really love the point that she made, which is exactly right. To make Adonai the way lovely Eddie Feld has made Adonai into a proper name instead of it's being and Lord is much more to the point. It's just a way of addressing. It's not a name.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, thanks, Abby.
So much fun.
This is great stuff.
I should just mention that there's the one option that you didn't mention. Is the one of André Chouraki in French, in which he simply reprints the 4 Hebrew letters, which gives us all a sense, if we understand that presence is the absent present tense of the verb to be in Hebrew is sort of compacted in the name of God.
It's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has also been somewhat translated, in as a form of the verb to be, so as the one who makes to be, a causative. Yeah, that's another possibility.
Yeah.
Let's not forget about Jehovah's Witnesses.
Let's not.
I think we did. I was pretty sure we did.
Okay. Okay. So,
All right.
so no,
Until
no
now.
blood transfusions. Anyway. All right. So
Jehovah's Witnesses.
good night.
Thanks,
Thank you
Abby.
so much.
Nice
Okay.
to see you.
Thanks to the great.
Bye, Lee. Bye, Norman.
See you.
By the way, is
Bye,
my,
Sam.
is my face appear
Bye,
on the
Sam.
screen?
Bye, Kate.
Bye, Kate.
Kate's still there. Yeah. Okay.
Kate's still there.
Bye,
Good
Alex.
night. Good night, everybody.
Bye. Bye.